Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a special Osteoporosis Canada holiday baking demo. Before we begin today's webinar, Osteoporosis Canada acknowledges the land that our offices, located in Toronto, are on, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your baking demo host today. Now, this webinar will provide general information about food knowledge. It's not intended as individualized health or nutrition advice, but if you have questions, please contact a registered dietitian or healthcare provider. Now, during the webinar, we would love to hear from you. So if you have questions or comments, just click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen or enter your comments in the chat, and we will do the best to answer as many questions as we can during the webinar within the time available. Now, as you probably have seen online, or if you've received an email from our national newsletter, we've been promoting the nutrient calculator a lot because we have a new tool, because nutrition is a key component for strong and healthy bones. There are 5 recommended bone building nutrients: calcium, vitamin D, protein, magnesium, and vitamin K. And they all have their own job in helping support, repair, and maintain bone. So if you would like to use the nutrient calculator, there's a QR code there, or you can visit the website at osteoporosis.ca, and it's right on the homepage. And you can enter in just what you eat in one day on average, and you can see if you are getting enough of the recommended daily allowance of calcium, vitamin D, protein, magnesium, or vitamin K. And of course, whenever possible, Osteoporosis Canada recommends to get bone building nutrients through food sources. So in today's featured recipe, we have some key ingredients that we want to talk about. So foods like walnuts, dried apricots, dried cranberries, dates, ground cinnamon, ground ginger are just a few foods, including molasses, that have these nutrients that we're talking about. Some of them don't have all the 5 nutrients, but many of them have calcium, protein, and magnesium. And of course, Greek yogurt, which has the most amount of calcium, protein, vitamin D, if it does in fact have that in your brand. So there are everyday foods that have a variety of nutrients, and that when you consume them, they add to your daily intake of nutrients. And that's why we thought it would be great to come up with a recipe that incorporated many of these foods. And we'll talk about the nutrients as we go along. Now, today's featured cooking demo recipe, I should have put baking demo there, is a winter fruit and nut cake with all those ingredients that I mentioned and many more. And per serving, we have 125 milligrams of calcium, 7 grams of protein, 50 milligrams of magnesium, 6.5 micrograms of vitamin K, and 0.2 micrograms of vitamin D. I will put this recipe link in the chat, but you can find this and other recipes at osteoporosis.ca/recipes. And as always, it is now my pleasure to welcome our friend, Emily Richards, who is a professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and she's the author and co-author of 11 cookbooks. Emily writes and develops recipes for print and online publications that include everyday cooking, baking, and healthy eating. And she can be found on TV, radio, and webcasts just like this one. Please welcome Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hello. Hey, Tracie, how's it going?
It is okay. We are so excited. We're going to have fun today. We have a holiday baking demo. We don't do this often. We don't do a lot of baking on here. So we're so excited. We have such good attendance. People are still making their way in. And what I said during the opening, there's so many new, foods that have small amounts that when you combine them really can help boost those bone building nutrients. Why don't you tell us what we're making today?
We are making that wonderful winter fruit and nut cake. So if you saw the photo and maybe it inspired you, to look outside, maybe there's snow where you are. I know there's plenty by me, but it's one of those recipes that it just kind of yells out comfort. You're going to bake it. The kitchen, the whole house is going to smell amazing. It just kind of brings out, I think, the best in everybody, because that's often what baking does. And
Makes you
I want to
happy,
know.
right?
I know it does. It
Makes you
totally
the
makes you happy.
smell, it
I'm
comes in, makes you happy.
to wipe the smile off my face.
I know.
But what I wanted to, so I'm wondering, Tracie, because obviously I can't see everybody who's joining us today, and let us know where you're joining us from, because
Yeah.
that's always fun to know. But I wanted to know if anyone, when Tracie put up the information about the recipe, how many of you kind of gasped and said, 7 grams of protein? Who thought, right? Like, it's sometimes we don't think about these things, and we're going to talk about that today, because you just have to add everything up, and you realize, there's benefit in enjoying some good stuff.
And there's room for all foods. We believe that there's room for all foods. And we'll say this now, we won't wait till later. We say it in every webinar that one meal, one day is not going to make or break you trying to get all your nutrients in. It's all about balance. And there's some really interesting facts, which we'll talk about, but we are good. Oh, people are letting us know, lots from BC. We've got people from Toronto. I'll go through them after so we can get Emily baking, but I will also do another apron giveaway. So that lovely purple apron that Emily always models. If you are on the webinar at the end and I pull your name, I will announce it. And we will announce the winner. Oh, snowy London, not just London, Ontario. It is a snowy London, Ontario. All right, let's get baking, Emily.
All right. So winter fruit nut cake, you might be going into the grocery store now or the bulk food stores and noticing all these wonderful dried fruits and nuts. And if you think that they've never been there before, they've always been there. They just kind of make them more prominent this time of year because they are typically used a little bit more frequently. So we're definitely using those today. And I have the recipe in front of me, as I always do, because I want to make sure everything goes in. I have all my mise en place ready because I want to talk to you. And if you guys have any questions about this recipe, or maybe you have some baking questions, this is a great opportunity. We can chat about it. Or maybe you have some ways that you sneak a little
Sound better, yeah.
Okay, so let Tracie know right away if I start crackling again, and I'm going to take off the headset and we'll go freestyle.
Everyone's saying it's actually better.
Oh, okay, great, awesome.
Yeah. Okay, off you go.
Okay, cool. So we're going to get started. We're going to follow the recipe, and you can grab the recipe at osteoporosis.ca. Tracie put it in the chat, so it's all good. All right, we're going to start off with those fruit and nuts because that's kind of the bulk of this recipe that provides color, texture, and guess what? Some of those nutrients that we were talking about right from the get-go. So we're going to start off with some walnuts. And here's the question that everybody always starts off with is, what can I substitute? So first and foremost, you can substitute, and I'll give you lots of substitutions. But what I want you to know is that anything that you change, you're going to change the nutrients of it, right? So if you don't like walnuts, but you like pecans, you can definitely do that. I like to use the softer nuts. So almonds are a little bit firmer, hazelnuts are a little bit firmer. So remember that if you're going to use those, because it's the slicing part. So using a softer nut like walnuts and pecans work really well in this, just because we have so much of the fruit and nut in it. So here's a classic. These are those red glacé cherries that, holiday time you tend to see everywhere. And if you can't find them in your local grocery store, these are always available year-round at the bulk stores, okay? And I'm not chopping them. I'm not doing anything. I also didn't chop the walnuts. These are walnut halves that I'm using. So I'm going to just put them in. If you want to chop them, you can. And what I like to do, especially when it's these kind of stickier fruits, dried fruits, I just rub a little bit of oil on my knife so that when I cut, it doesn't stick to the knife as much, which leads me into another delicious dried fruit, and these are dates. You could use dried prunes if you wanted to in place of the dates. They have a natural sweetness that's really, really delicious, and they almost have that little bit of a caramel flavor that works really well with all the fruits and nuts that we're using. I'm using medjool dates, which tend to be that softer date, but you could use the newer dates or any dried dates that you find. Make sure that the pits are gone. So you do have to chop these, so you'll be able to remove the pits as you're chopping. And then here's a couple more dried fruits. Dried apricots are going to go in. So I love dried apricots. I love snacking on them. Just eating a couple with some almonds as a little afternoon snack, pick me up, is absolutely delicious. And they're going to give us a really nice bright color. If you notice, a lot of the things I'm adding have a lighter color to them. So I want to kind of keep some color in this cake because it will have a dark appearance because of some of the other ingredients that we're adding. And here's my dried cranberries. So this could be dried blueberries, it could be raisins, it could be another dried cherries if you happen to have them. And it just is the combination of all these fruits and the walnuts that come together to create that fruit and nut texture in the cake itself. Okay, so I think I have all of them. Now we're going to add some more flavor. This is all about kind of having those wonderful warm spices and kind of aroma that when it's baking, I honestly like it when it bakes, you're just going to want to pour yourself a cup of tea and wait by the oven to have it pop out because it's going to be so wonderful. All right, orange. I love orange, especially in baking. So we're going to actually use some orange zest and some of the juice. But right now you'll see a lot of other citrus like clementines or mandarin available, and you can use that zest as well. Okay, so don't feel that you have to, if you're not an orange lover, but you do love your clementines, you can definitely use the zest. Just make sure you give it a wash before you take the zest off. So I'm just using my rasp and I'm going to take the zest. We only need about half a teaspoon because believe it or not, using that zest adds a ton of flavor. Now, if you wanted to change things up a little bit, you could use some lemon zest in here. That would be really, really lovely. Just give it a little bit of a twist. Okay. So I usually find that a half of a smaller orange gives me about half a teaspoon of the zest. Okay. So I'm just going to get a little bit more off. And I love using my rasp this way because then all I have to do, you notice that it's getting caught in the rasp here. Just have to turn it over and give it a little tap right in the bowl. Okay. And the aroma has already started with that beautiful freshness of the orange zest. And then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of fresh orange juice. So because I needed the zest, you can cut the orange in half and squeeze out the juice. I already did that because I needed an orange earlier. And I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of that orange juice right in the fruit. So why am I doing this? This is to help soften any of those fruits that may have been in the cupboard for a little bit longer than perhaps that you remembered, but it's also going to help distribute some of that wonderful orange flavor. I'm going to just break up some of these cherries here because they are a little bit stuck together. There. So that's the first part. And if this is reminiscent of perhaps a fruit cake, it kind of takes a nod from a fruit cake itself. Okay. So I'm going to set that aside right there because we don't want it to go too far. And we're going to use our dry ingredients. So this is where the spices come into play. Okay. The reason why I'm doing the recipe this way is so that this has the opportunity to sit while we get all of our other ingredients together. Now, the one kind of overarching theme when it comes to baking is to have your ingredients out at room temperature so they all come together easily. So that's one of the other reasons why I had everything out here so that it just comes together, and it's also a great way to check that you have all your ingredients ready to go. All right, so this is my all-purpose flour, and I have all my spices that I'm going to bring in here that we're going to add, and our leaveners. I'm actually using 2 leaveners. I'm using baking powder and baking soda today because of some of the ingredients that we're using in order to get that little bit of a lighter textured cake. Okay, so I'm going to add some baking powder and some baking soda and some salt, because believe it or not, that salt helps bring out all the other spices that we're going to use, which leads me to our spices, which are kind of our 2 big ones. So we have the orange flavor coming through, but we have cinnamon and ginger. So kind of that classic gingerbread flavor that will come through. But I didn't want to call the cake a gingerbread cake because it's kind of not a gingerbread cake, but it does have that inspiration from it. Okay, so we're going to make sure that this gets all whisked together nicely. And this is always something that I get questions about is, do I really need to measure everything out in all these different bowls? I'm not in your kitchen. So if you don't want to measure it this way, I won't tell. But for me, it's about making sure that I have all the ingredients. And in this case, because I'm using 2 leaveners, I want to make sure that everything is all whisked throughout the flour so that when I go to stir it into the entire mixture, it's nice and even. Okay, so there's my second bowl. Don't worry, I'm going to do the dishes as well. I'm not asking anyone to commit to doing dishes. So here's where our kind of wet ingredients come into play. And we're going to start off with our butter. So the butter needs to be softened. And if you go to make this recipe and your butter's in the fridge and you're like, what do I do? You can put the mixer in the bowl and try to beat it around, and then more than likely it's going to end up all over your cupboards. Trust me, I've been there. So you can do a couple things. You can put some warm water in a glass, dump it out and kind of cover it so that that steam of the hot glass will help melt. You can pop it in the microwave for a very, very short time because you don't want it to melt. It changes the structure of the cake, and so we don't want that to happen. You can also grate the butter, but that doesn't work for everybody because grating butter can be a little bit dangerous for some. So I usually like to measure out my butter first and then get all my other ingredients out so that by the time I actually make the recipe, the butter is usually at a good temperature, okay? So I've made 2 components of this recipe. Do we have any questions yet, Tracie, before I kind of jump into our butter and sugar mixture?
Making noise with the mixer. We actually have so many questions. We have so many good questions. And I'm just going to scroll through here. Let me just comment on the whole, like, I'm all about using the least amount of dishes, but as someone who's had a few kitchen incidents, let's say, the reason why it's really good to measure some things separately, like eggs or your dry ingredients, is if you're not paying attention, you may lose count about how much flour or how much baking soda or what sugar, whatever it is you're putting in. And if you put it in, you can't take it out. But if you kind of mess up one little area, at least you can kind of fix that. And I find it just incorporates better so you don't overmix your batters if we're talking about cakes or muffins. So that's just like, from my kitchen to yours, kind of thing. But I'm just going to scroll quickly. We have people from like Nova Scotia, Guelph, Mississauga, Ottawa, as I scroll down. So I have a question on butter. I'm going to kind of start where I see them. Let's talk about salted butter versus unsalted butter, because you can't just interchange, especially if you add salts. Emily, what do we do? And where should you use salted butter?
This is also very personal, FYI.
Yes.
So I always let people know what I do and, with recipes, but this is just information. So if you don't like it, that's okay. You don't have to. So when you see a butter called for in a recipe and the ingredients, and it just says butter, most often they're referring to salted butter because that is typically what most people buy and most people have available. And so if you are not a salted butter user, note that even if there is salt in the butter, in the recipe, if you're using unsalted butter, you may find that something will fall a little bit flat because you're using the unsalted butter. Now, you can use the same amount. So if it's half a cup of salted butter, it's half a cup of unsalted butter, but you might want to add an extra pinch of salt to the recipe if you're using unsalted butter. The other thing is if you are purchasing unsalted butter, and let's say you get a good deal on it, because right now we all want the deal on the butter, and there are a few places, if you are in Ontario,
I went and got mine.
They have it for under $5 a pound, which is great. And so if you're kind of stockpiling that butter, if it is unsalted, make sure you put it in the freezer. Okay. There is no preservative. There's no salt in there. So if you're planning on keeping it around for 3 or 4 weeks, you're going to start to notice it discolors on the outside. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of not as fresh. as when you first purchase it. So where salted butter, because it has the salt in it, preserves it for a little bit longer. So you don't see that color change typically for like months and months and months. You can freeze both butters, by the way. And this recipe, as with all osteoporosis recipes, we just use basic salted butter unless specified, okay? So if the recipe calls for unsalted butter, that means they've taken into account salt and unsalted butter. And in some cases, like I'm going to be honest with you, when I make shortbread, because it is the season, I do use unsalted butter because I really want that butter flavor to come through as opposed to any of the other flavors. Because typically when I make shortbread, it's all about the shortbread. It's all about that richness in the butter. And then you can buy specialty butters that are higher percentages of fat. So if you want to have that little bit of decadence, which you can, the cost is definitely a little bit higher as well, but you'll be able to, and I recommend this, you taste the butter first and see if you do want that salt in it or maybe not, because especially if they're from different countries, the milk that they use to create the butter as well as the salt is different than what we do here. So I hope that helps. Does
That was
cover
really
kind
good.
of...
No, that was really good because we did get a couple of questions. I just learned something. I thought that when you read a recipe, it called for butter, it meant unsalted. And if it was going to call for salted, it would ask for salted butter. So
No,
I
it's the
reverse it,
opposite.
but it's the opposite.
It is the opposite.
And just a quick note, and then we'll move on from butter. But if you are someone who really likes to do cutout cookies or that kind of thing, not all butters are the same in the sense your cookies can spread with certain butters, right, Emily? Like if you use a different fat content, sometimes they'll spread a little bit more. So if you want really precise, or if you don't care like I do and just want to make some cookies tonight, give them away and enjoy.
It's usually a couple things. It's not always just the butter, but yes, the butter, the percentage of fat definitely plays a role, but it's also the sugar. So
Yes.
if it's brown sugar, white sugar, dark brown sugar, they all have different roles in, especially when it comes to cookies and baking. So if you just have, I'll give you an example. I always use chocolate chip cookies as for my example. If you have a recipe that calls for butter and brown sugar, in a cookie recipe, their reference for brown sugar is the light golden yellow sugar, not dark brown sugar. So it's the same thing. If you see a recipe for brown sugar, which is what we're also using today, it's the yellow sugar. Recipes will call for dark brown sugar when they want that. There's more molasses in it. You know, when you pick it up, it's really soft and so luscious. It's going to give you a kind of flatter cookie. It's going to kind of melt a little bit faster in the oven. So your chocolate chip cookies get a little bit flatter if there's a higher percentage of dark brown sugar, okay? So that's just an example of how butter and sugar play a role in baking. And luckily for us, we're not using very much of either in this recipe because we actually have sweeteners, two sweeteners. We're using sugar and molasses today. And for good reason, which we'll talk about when I add it. But I do have to make some noise.
You have to go. Yeah, no, we do have other questions. I'm going to hold on to them, everyone. Don't worry. Keep sending them in. You know what's so interesting is I actually can't hear that mixer on.
Oh, you can't?
No,
well, this mixer is kind of old, but one of the reasons why I keep it around is because it's not too loud. A lot of the newer mixers are quite loud because their motor's so strong, but this one is bandaged up with electrical tape and everything. I love it so much.
I love my old appliances. Okay, you go.
So this is our half cup of butter. And we're going to add our sugar next, which is the brown sugar. So that golden yellow sugar. Why we call it brown sugar and not golden yellow? Some recipes actually do, but in most cases, brown sugar is what we're looking for. And because it is a lighter sugar, you do want to pack it into your dry measuring cup when you're measuring it, okay? So that you get that full cup, in our case, third cup that we're using. And then I'm just going to beat together. And if your brown sugar's been around for a little while, what you want to do is just rub it through your fingers a little bit so that you don't have any large lumps, okay? So there goes our butter and sugar mixture. And now we're going to add our molasses. So this was one sweetener, okay? from the sugar, but now we're going to add molasses, and we're going to use 1/3 of a cup. So you can use a liquid measure for your fancy molasses or your cooking molasses, your molasses in general. I'm going to use a dry measuring cup because it's easier to scoop out. Now, the other thing you can do is spray it with a little bit or rub a little bit of oil in it so that it just kind of slides right out. You can use fancy molasses or cooking molasses for this recipe, but there's a big difference in calcium, believe it or not. So if you take a look at your nutrition label, this is the cooking molasses one that I have here. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it close up, but this per tablespoon has 100 milligrams of calcium in it. Okay, so these are the little things that Tracie was talking about in the beginning, that when you add them up in your recipes, they build, right? So I used 1/3 of a cup in this recipe. So across our servings, it doesn't seem like much, but when you add it with the other ingredients that we're using, it helps build up to that 125 milligrams of calcium per slice. Amazing, right? So I'm going to, this one's already open, so I'm going to use the fancy molasses here, and we need 1/3 of a cup. So I'm just going to measure it out. And I like using the dry measuring cup for this because I can see it level. Sometimes when you're using a liquid measure, you know, you have to bend down and make sure that the meniscus is in the right spot. Remember that. So in goes our molasses, and we'll get all of that out. And this is what's going to give us that lovely kind of additional gingerbread flavor, but it's also going to give us that really nice golden dark color. Okay, there, just put that over there. And we're going to beat this in as well. And you'll start to see that familiar kind of gingerbread color coming through. And then we're going to add our eggs. And for our eggs, we are using large eggs. So if you happen to have, like if you buy jumbo or extra large eggs, I want to say that 1 egg would be enough, but it's usually 1 egg and a bit of an extra large egg. So I always just buy, I want to do it one at a time. I always just buy large eggs because, again, in most recipes, the reference is large eggs. Okay, so just combining 1 egg at a time in here. And you can see I'm not really struggling to get my ingredients together because everything's been at room temperature, which has been a huge help for me. Okay, there's my 2nd egg. Now, if you didn't want to do this in a mixer, that's when it's really important to have everything at room temperature so that you can kind of stir it together. And what the mixer does is adds a little bit of air as we're mixing it, so it actually makes the cake a little bit lighter. And you can start to see kind of the bubbles that are coming up. All right, so here's where we're getting a little extra calcium and protein because we're using plain Greek yogurt in our cake, okay? So this goes right in. And this is where, if your yogurt is coming right out of the refrigerator, which is totally okay, by the way, you may start to see a little bit of a curdled effect. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the cold coming into the warmer ingredients. That's all. Okay. And then I'm also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla because we want this to be absolutely wonderful. And then I'm just going to beat this in so that it's kind of all together. Okay. And you don't have to go crazy with the mixing here. There we are. And then I'm just going to grab my spatula so that, and I got my gingerbread spatula. And then I'm just going to, guess what? Mix everything together, almost. I'm going to go back to my nut mixture and my flour mixture because I need to add, remember we talked about this kind of being sticky and wonderful. So if I were to dump it into my mixture all at once, I might get some clumps of fruit and nuts together. So to help kind of keep everything loose, I'm taking 3 tablespoons of this flour mixture, and I'm going to stir it in with my fruit and nuts. Okay, so just take the time to do this before you keep going with the recipe. I promise you it's worth it If you forget, you might end up with a lot of fruit and nuts at the bottom of your cake. It's still going to taste delicious, don't worry. But this just kind of helps keep everything suspended in the cake itself. Okay. All right, so I'm going to set this aside. Bring this mixture in, put all my flour mixture in, and start stirring. And then guess what? This is going to go into, okay? So Tracie, do you want to ask a couple more questions while I'm stirring? Because this will take
Yes,
a little.
I do. So we're getting questions about substitution. So let me just say this first. Baking is not like cooking. And sometimes you can't change things in baking because it's science, right? We've been talking a lot about leavening and properties about, if things are at room temperature, they will combine better. You need it at a certain temperature. But I find loaf cakes like this are very forgiving. Emily, feel free to disagree because like if you kind of decide, like somebody just asked, can they not include the nuts? So if you have a nut allergy, and you don't want to include the nuts, what would you suggest? I mean, you could do it, but and a loaf cake is a little different. You may need to do what?
So it's 1 cup of nuts. So that's a big component
Yeah.
of everything, right? So we need to then replace it with something else. So if you want it just to be a fruit winter cake, you can add a cup of a combination of the other ingredients, okay? So that would work fine. If you wanted to use a different nut, so a firmer nut, so I mentioned almonds, I wouldn't use whole almonds. They'll be too hard to cut through, same with whole hazelnuts, but you could use slivered almonds and then they would kind of disperse throughout. So if it's a large component of the recipe, like 1 cup of something, try to balance it out with some of the other ingredients to replace it. So you could definitely do that. There's nothing to say that you can't add, a little bit of a different fruit. So let's say you want to do cranberries and raisins. So just replace that 1 cup with some of those other things, so that the substance of the cake itself will be the same, okay? The other one that I wanted to mention is that for a substitution, I've made this with gluten-free flour and it works really well. So, but I used the cup for cup flour. So it's that 1-to-1. It's already got xanthan gum in it. If you're making your own mixes of gluten-free flour, I can't guarantee that it'll work, but if it does have a nice balance of different gluten-free flours and xanthan gum, there's enough sturdiness with the fruit and nuts that you'll get a really nice loaf, which is great. Okay, so hopefully that helps as well.
And you did answer the gluten-free question because we
Oh,
did
good.
get gluten, so that was really good about the gluten-free. Somebody asked if they could also use lactose-free yogurt. In baking, you don't really tell the difference, do you? If you use lactose-free versus plain, or do you, Emily?
Well, again, it's about the amount. So we've only used 1/2 cup here. So, and it really is to kind of help add a little bit of moisture and tang. So remember I mentioned those 2 leaveners, I'm using baking powder and soda. The reason I have both in there is I do want to have a lighter textured cake because of all the density of the fruit and nuts, but I also have some acidic ingredients in there. So the baking soda plays a really big role in that. And so the molasses and the yogurt are 2 components that are on the acidic side. So that's what helps balance it off. And whether it's lactose containing yogurt or not, it will have some forms of acidity. So that will help with that as well.
Okay, great. Do you want to keep going or do you want me to keep giving you questions?
Yeah, I'll do this and then
Great. Then
I'll
you
get
check
this
back
one in
in
the
if you're
oven.
good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wanted to give options for this loaf because if you're thinking, oh, Emily, that looks great, but that's a lot of loaf and I'm just, 1 person or two people in my home. So I wanted to give you the option that you can do this lovely this is just an 8 pan. It's kind of like a muffin tin. You can also use a muffin tin, by the way, you'll get 12, not 8. And you can make small ones so that this is fabulous because you can keep a couple. They freeze beautifully, by the way. You can keep a couple for yourself and then gift a bunch of these because right now you can get beautiful little paper, little plastic, those little cellophane type gift bags that are perfect. So if you wanted to go visit a neighbor for tea, You could pack this, maybe a little jar of homemade jam if you've made jam this year, and it makes a beautiful hostess gift. So there's lots of great options for the kind of smaller home. So I don't want you to feel like you got to make this whole loaf and commit, but you can make the whole loaf and then freeze part of it as well. So I'm always a big fan of that. Now, what I do want to point out is that this mixture can be a little bit heavy. So it takes a little bit of muscle to stir it. So if you're feeling like it's a little too much, just kind of give it a minute and then stir it again, because you do want to make sure that all the flour has been stirred into the mixture. Okay, so because we added all those fruit and nuts with the flour, with all of that, it can be a little bit weighted with that. Okay, so just take your time, don't get frustrated with it. And so here's my loaf pan. This is an 8x4 loaf pan. This is a metal. I prefer baking in metal as opposed to glass, but if all you have is glass or ceramic, it will totally work, because we're doing this at a lower temperature. We're doing it at 325, so my oven's already on, and that's because it's a long time bake, and I don't want it to kind of cook quickly so that it's like hard on the outside and runny and not cooked on the inside. So 325 is a great temperature for that. I am going to line it with parchment paper. If you use these little pans, just spray them or brush them with a little bit of butter or oil. You don't need to line them. But I like to line my loaf pan. It's just a little bit easier. So I just take a piece of parchment that's a little bit bigger, probably about 2 inches or so outside the edge. And then I'm just going to pinwheel the corners here. Okay. This is just so that I get kind of flat edges all along, and then just push it in. Okay. Because as you go to fill this, you don't want the parchment paper creeping up. You want to try to get it nice and flat. Okay, like that. And then we're just going to scoop this in. All right, Tracie, questions as I scoop in?
All right, somebody just asked about the cooking time if you did the mini ones, and I'm just putting it in the chat. So if you use an 8 mini loaf pan, you would bake it for about 30 minutes or until tester comes out clean. So it is on the recipe page. We've put everything on. So when you visit the link, you'll find everything, and you'll find the full nutrient breakdown. Somebody also asked about, and I think I'm going to try to combine a few questions. So if you don't have dried cranberries and you want to use raisins, or if you want to use dried ginger, or if you want to use, there's a whole bunch of dried figs, like there's a whole bunch of other dried fruits. Is it safe to say, Emily, like as long as you do the measurements, you can incorporate whatever you want? So it's really your flavor. You're making this your own.
It is, totally. So dried figs work, dried prunes work, raisins, any kind of dried fruit that you love. You could even, if you had some dried apples and you wanted to chop them up,
Oh,
you wanted to make it a little bit, if you wanted to make it a little bit more tropical, you could use dried mango or dried pineapple. And that, so you really just want the amount to be so within the, I'll do the math right here. 1, 2, it's 3 cups total of fruit. Okay. I'm just going to pop this in the oven and wash my hands. And so that's kind of key there. And don't worry, you guys don't have to stick around for an hour, because I already baked one. And so that should answer that question. And then, yes, so if you're making the little ones, it does take less time to bake. And if you're making the muffins, start checking them at the half-hour mark, because they do cook a little bit quicker. I want to point out that the ginger, the dried ginger, crystallized ginger, 100% add it. If you add half a cup of it, though, it might be a little bit overpowering. You have to make sure you love ginger. So I would add maybe a 1/4 cup to the loaf and then just make up the difference with something else. But the other thing about the crystallized ginger is that you can actually use it on top of the icing, which is what I'm going to make next, because that will just bring out that ginger, but in a different way. But I love crystallized ginger, and I know a lot of people use it during the holidays. And so it would be fabulous in the recipe too. Is there another question?
Yes, and so we're going to talk about the molasses now. So Emily did already kind of talk about the cooking molasses. So 2 things. As you saw Emily do, she flipped the carton on its side and she read the product label. wherever possible, read your product labels. It will have the breakdown of nutrients so you can kind of gauge what you're going to replace or what you're going to consume, etc. But molasses is not the same. So fancy molasses is different than the cooking molasses. I find it's difficult to find cooking molasses, at least, sorry, not cooking. Is it blackstrap?
Blackstrap.
Thank you. I was going
You
to
were
say
going to say
something else.
bootstrap.
I know. I was like, no, that's a whole other thing. No, that's not right. I find it easier to find fancy in cooking than it is to find the blackstrap molasses. The difference is that see, now I want to say the wrong one. The blackstrap has a lot more calcium. It's a lot more concentrated. It's a different kind of blend. So for 100 milligrams of calcium for 1 tablespoon for the blackstrap, I did it, sorry. The fancy in the cooking has 30 milligrams of calcium. Now, that is still a good amount of calcium. Now, I'm going to use this example. I'm not saying that molasses equals broccoli, but 1 serving of broccoli, which is half a cup of broccoli, has 35 milligrams of calcium. I'm just giving you the example to show that there's all different kinds of foods, and this is not an excuse to go eat a whole bunch of gingerbread cookies or the whole loaf of the winter fruit and nut cake. But it is something where if you're going to use a sweetener and if you enjoy the flavor, there's no point in consuming this if you don't like it. You don't like the taste, don't do it. There's a whole bunch of other foods that you can consume to get the nutrients you need. Now, somebody else did have a question, like, what do I do with all this molasses? If really you're not someone who uses it a lot, there are other things like if you want to use a sweetener, let's say in a beverage, in oatmeal, if you want to make baked beans, like there are other things. And, the companies that produce these products, they know that people sometimes go, what else? Get on their website. They probably have recipes that can help you, or it's pretty shelf stable. You can make muffins or cookies or make this cake again. Emily, what would you?
Guess what? We have a great molasses granola on the Osteoporosis
That is
website.
right. We do. And I'm going to ask, so Roy is in the background. Nobody ever sees Roy. Hey, Roy, can you put the recipe for the granola, the homemade granola? It was really easy. We did a cooking demo. Yes. And we purposely chose the molasses. And if you can pop that into the chat. So Roy's doing that right now. He'll do that. But yeah, so there is like, I don't use it often, but I always have it on hand because I like to whip up a batch of treats with molasses. There's others, but I'm going to let you make that icing.
Okay, so I'm going to make, so truth be known, you can make the winter fruit and nut loaf and you're going to be happy. You can just slice it, eat it warm. It will it does need to cool a bit just because of everything that's in it, but you can definitely slice it, enjoy a thicker slice warm. But what kind of made this a little bit more of a cake was the icing, and just to have some fun and make it a little bit different and very festive. So I would very happily serve this at the end of a meal. Great with coffee or tea or milk in the afternoon. If you wanted to, I know during the holidays, people like to enjoy a little bit of extra deliciousness. So, in the morning with your yogurt, you might want to have a slice. But definitely as a dessert, if you're having a holiday meal or if you're having family come over, a get together, this would definitely kind of fit the bill for that. So we're going to make a little bit of a cream cheese frosting. And so I have here half a cup of cream cheese. Okay. And I'm just going to, this one's not quite at room temperature as our butter was. So I'm just going to soften it up a little bit here. There we are. And I'm going to add just a touch of butter to it. Okay. So again, same butter, it's salted, but it definitely is softened. So we're going to mix those two together. And that just adds to the creaminess of the cream cheese, makes it a little bit spreadable, but it also helps, especially if you want to make it ahead, just kind of give it a little bit more body and solidify the frosting a little bit. All right. So to that, we're going to add our icing sugar. Okay, so this is where things can get a little bit messy with icing sugar flying all over the place. So I'm just going to add half and do this on low so that you don't end up with too much of a big mess. Okay. And really what we're trying to do here is incorporate the icing sugar enough to start to see that kind of fluffy texture come through. So there goes most of it. I'm going to add my little bits of cream cheese that have flown out of my bowl. I'm going to add the rest of that icing sugar. And then I'm also going to add just a bit of vanilla because I want that little bit of flavor to come through. And just a tablespoon or so of, I'm using whipping cream, but if you happen to have the yogurt out still, you could use a little bit of yogurt here. The whipping cream gives it just a little bit of added fluffiness. But if you don't have whipping cream at home, use another kind of milk. So milk would work. If you have coffee cream at home, that will just kind of help add that just enough liquid to give us a nice spreadable consistency. So if you can see in my bowl, that little touch of cream just gave us this beautiful spreadable frosting. Okay. And just like that, our cream cheese frosting is done. Okay. So you can make this ahead of time and keep it separate if you want. And then if you are making the cake to freeze, don't freeze it with the icing on it. Just make the icing separate. You can keep it in the fridge for about a week or so if you want. And especially if you're going to be maybe enjoying some cake now, so you want to cut the loaf and then freeze some of it. You can also easily reduce the amount of cream cheese frosting, but you know what? This is really good on a lot of, special little treats over the holiday. So I'm going to bring out, I made a loaf earlier today, and because I wanted it nice and cool in order to ice it. So you can't ice it warm, although I'm not going to say it's not bad because the icing just kind of melts into the warm loaf and it's absolutely delicious. So what you're going to look for, check it at the hour mark. Again, this is going to vary on the pan that you're using in your oven. What you're want to do is just take a cake tester, skewer, toothpick, whatever you have, and go inside and you want to pull it out. And if it's clean, it's ready to come out of the oven. If it has a little bit of that kind of stickiness or the batter on the tester, just tuck it back in, and it may take 5 or 10 minutes longer, okay? But it will have a deep golden brown all over, and it's a flat loaf. It's not gonna have a peak because of all of that wonderful fruit and nut in there. So this is why it makes a great vehicle to have this icing on it, okay? Which I'm going to put on. So Tracie, now I can answer more questions because now I'm just going to play and have fun with the icing.
So good as you're going to put that on. We do have some other questions, but I'm going to ask this one first because it's a fun question. I think yes, but let's let Emily answer. So Lisa would like to know, is this the type of cake that can be wrapped in rum-soaked cheesecloth and can be frozen? Sounds good to me.
Yes, you can. I never know when these kinds of questions are going to come up, but yes, you can totally do that. And it, 'tis the season. If you are going to do something like that, I would recommend a deeper, darker rum or a spiced rum that has more flavor and more substance to it, so that it penetrates through and gets the flavor right into the cake itself, which is really nice. So yes, I agree with Tracie. Yes, you can.
Yes, and this is not any official point of view. This is simply just a comment. So good question. I do have, let me just see here. They've got a few more questions. Now so Nancy has said, I really have hated Christmas cake in the past. And she likes your mango tropical version, but I think if we have, bad memories of fruitcake as kids growing up, this is not what this is. I remember what that was. And also it's not to have this enormous piece as well. So that's a really interesting comment. Here's a good one about flour. So Mary's asking, can she use almond flour or oat flour or a combination? What happens if the flours are changed?
So that's a great question. And what ends up happening, so I've used oat flour successfully in a number of recipes as a substitute in amongst some all-purpose flour. The texture is definitely different. Almond flour, that's where it gets a little bit trickier just because of the fact that it's a nut. So it also has a bigger richness to it and density. So it can be a little bit heavier. And so it's always tricky for me to say, well, just substitute it, because that's also a lot of money. These flours are more expensive. And also the money that goes into all the other ingredients that you've purchased. So what I usually do when I want to test out those types of flours is on something a little bit more casual, like a muffin, and start that way and see, do I even like the texture? Because oftentimes we think that we want to make these substitutions, but we might not actually like the texture of it. If you need to because of dietary restrictions, then that's something that you'll over time have to get used to. But that's where a lot of people that I know, because of dietary restrictions, start playing with different flours and create their own mix, and then create their own methodology behind it so that it's successful in their kitchen. And it's also something that they like, because oftentimes, it's like how we like brands. Sometimes we'll prefer a brand of gluten-free flour over this one, or a brand of mayonnaise over this one, because of the texture or the flavor that it provides. So that goes the same for the flour. So not to kind of cheat the answer, but I think it's great to be able to experiment that way, and then maybe not kind of break the bank on all the other ingredients.
I think that's an excellent way to kind of go ahead if you do want to start replacing some of the ingredients and making it more personalized to what you want to eat or what you want to use in your recipes. And really, at the end of the day, we just provide the framework. We always say once you start switching things out, the nutritional content may change, etc. But really, it's what you enjoy, what is accessible to you, and how you want to cook and consume your food. It should not be stressful. It should be fun.
No, and
Yeah,
what I always think is a great idea too is that if you are successful at these things, that you need to share what you've done. Don't be afraid, especially if you have access to social media or you're on social media. Let people know, because I guarantee you there's other people that want to know. So if I have success with something, I'm happy to put it in a recipe or share it, because it was successful, and I want people to be able to have success as well. So if you are willing to be creative in your kitchen and test things out, let the world know, because I guarantee you other people want to know the same.
there's a whole group of people that post about food. Emily and I are part of that. This is why this program works so well. You're also part of that, everyone here watching. So, Emily, you know what I'm going to suggest? Why don't we finish off the cake? You have to do your lovely taste test, and then I'll just check for last minute questions and stuff. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Okay.
So I just put the icing all over. And again, you don't have to if you're freezing it. I recommend that you wrap it well, and you can wrap it with foil and then put it in an airtight container so that it doesn't pick up any other flavors that are in the freezer. Perhaps, that, I don't know, maybe you have some liver in there. So just to kind of protect it. Same goes if you're doing the individuals, wrap them individually, and then you can put them into an airtight container to protect them. Also, so that nothing squishes them in the freezer. If you happen to throw a roast in there, you don't want your cake to be squished. So the icing goes on. And this is the introduction now. So you are going to be serving this to your guests, and you want them to see how beautiful it is. So take some of the ingredients from inside and put them on the outside. So I have here few dried cranberries, a little bit of dried apricots, and I kind of snuck away while Tracie was talking a little bit earlier. And guess what I brought out? Some crystallized ginger. So I'm going to add some of that crystallized ginger on top too, because it does look beautiful, a little bit like jewels on top of a cake. Okay, I'm just going right down the middle, but you can sprinkle it all over the place. So I just diced up, this is just the ginger slices, the crystallized ginger slices. I diced it up and sprinkled it on top as well. So I'm going to get a serrated knife for this because I think it's going to be a little bit better. Okay, and I'll cut the end piece off just like that, and then maybe we can peek inside. Oh, I just smeared, I know it's so wispy as I turn it, but check out all that fruit in there. You can see it just looks like little jewels, and the nuts, and it's got that beautiful color in it, that golden brown color. And oh, look at that, there's extra icing on the cutting board. I'll have to eat that too. So if you're serving it like fruitcake, I usually cut the slices in half and you can put it with other holiday treats. If you're putting them out for guests as part of a tray, they're absolutely delicious. But as I mentioned, you can just put a slice on for an after dessert is second dessert after dessert, an after dinner dessert, and it would be absolutely delicious. So I'm going to eat this, and then Tracie, if there's more questions, I'll just talk with my mouth full.
You can nod. You can just nod and
icing.
be like, well, oh my God, that looks so good. And you know what? It's just sometimes you just want to eat something, you make it pretty, it smells so yummy, and it's a treat and it's wonderful. And so many people are just saying, Emily, that they love you, that they love the recipe. So that's wonderful. We're so happy you're all here. They are, yes, and everyone is like, I think we may have converted some people who were traumatized by fruitcake early on in life to try this. I'm just checking. There was a question about if instead of eggs, you could use flaxseed.
That's a great question. So because it's only 2 eggs, I wouldn't have a problem with doing flax eggs in this recipe. It will be a little bit more dense. The fact that we have the 2 chemical leaveners will help kind of create a little bit more lightness. So yes, I'd be okay with using the flax eggs in here. You can also use some egg substitutes that are no eggs. That will work in here as well. Just make sure you read the packaging to say how much to use per egg. And remember that these are large eggs, and they usually use the large eggs in their substitutions. The one thing I wanted to point out that I didn't really mention, and I was like, oh, should I say it? Should I not? So you could very easily add a couple tablespoons of ground flax to this, some wheat germ. You could add some wheat bran to this if you wanted as well. I would only add a couple tablespoons because this is not meant to be, if I had made this with whole wheat flour and it would still be delicious, by the way, but the more of those things that you add, it gets a little bit heavier and it kind of takes away from what it is. So if you want to add a couple tablespoons, you definitely can, but this is really meant to be what it is, a winter fruit and nut cake to be enjoyed. And I'm going to enjoy it.
You enjoy that. No, that's good. And thank you. I was also reminded about the apron. See, we're a community. We all help. We all help because it has happened where we've forgotten all kinds of stuff. Kind of thing. So yes, I'm just double checking here. Oh, that person is still on. So congratulations. And I hope I pronounce everything correctly. Linda Carstairs from Erskine, Alberta. Congratulations. You have won the apron. I will email you after this and we will get this all done. And I hope everyone really enjoyed this. You are very welcome. We've got thank yous coming in. I'm going to just share some last minute information, but this is the last cooking demo and actually webinar of 2024 for us. So we are working on new content. There are actually new recipes you're going to find early next year, and we've got new cooking demos. So I'm just going to share my screen here. And just a quick reminder, so we did record this today. You will be receiving, because you registered, a direct link to the OC Replay webpage where we record all of our best content. And so you can go there and find other webinars, other cooking demos. Again, I encourage you to visit the website and use the nutrient calculator. We know that not all foods are in this tool, and so we are actively updating it, but it has a really large amount of common everyday foods. So please try that out. And of course, there's also the podcast that we have, and there will be new podcasts coming. I just wanted to say thank you to those who do make a donation. And if you are looking to give, because of the Canada Post service disruption, we are not receiving mail like everyone else, but you can securely make a donation online at osteoporosis.ca. Then you will also immediately get a tax receipt. So if you have mailed in a donation, we will have to wait until we receive it so that we can also send you that. If you feel more comfortable making a donation over the phone, you can also do that. And your funds help provide us the opportunity to fund educational programs, support services, and resources like this webinar and cooking demo to help empower Canadians to optimize their bone and muscle health and improve the lives of those affected by osteoporosis. And if this would, there we go. But we also just want to thank you. I want to thank Emily. She does so much great work for us. I want to thank everyone who joins our programs and helps share them. We had a lot of referrals for this webinar. When we asked people how they join, a lot were from friends and family. So from us to you, we wish you a wonderful holiday and a very sweet new year. We can't wait to see you again in the new year. So thanks to Roy, who you can't see. Thank you to Emily. Thank you to all of you. Be well. Subscribe so that you get everything we do right to your inbox. And take care, everyone. Be safe. Happy baking. Happy cooking. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.